Hey everyone, so in this video we'll be talking about Scratchmen Apoo and his powers. Now let's be honest, the only reason we started caring a lot more about this guy recently is because in the latest chapter, 980, he gave Luffy and Zoro an absolute run for their money during their not-so-subtle invasion at Onigashima. Now before this, he was always only in the back of our minds because, well, there was just more important things to think about. Now this thing about Apoo successfully hurting Luffy and Zoro with his Devil Fruit ability has completely blown out of proportion, with people saying that Apoo is now commander level, he's stronger than Luffy and Zoro, etc, etc. Now this is almost definitely not the case. Like really, I seriously do not think Apoo is commander level. Now this is not to take anything away from Apoo, he's still pretty strong. We shouldn't really be surprised, honestly, that he was able to hurt Zoro and Luffy, because he is one of the pirates of the worst generation. He's a supernova, so we would expect him to be considerably strong. But he's just not stronger than Zoro or Luffy. That's the bottom line. But this whole situation does encourage us to consider how strong Apoo really is, what exactly his powers are, and how he will play his role in this war at Onigashima, which is what I'm going to talk about in this video. Now let's start by going into Apoo's background a little bit. So Apoo was first introduced right before the time skip, when new pirates who had already built good reputations for themselves gathered on Sabaody Archipelago, because that was the island many pirates went through to get to the New World. This is also the time when all of the 12 rookie pirates known as the Worst Generation was introduced. I'm talking about Kid, Law, and the other big shots, Apoo included. Now Apoo has a Devil Fruit whose powers rely on music. Now we don't exactly know what the name of his fruit is yet, but we've seen him use his abilities multiple times. The first time was when he fought against Admiral Kizaru with the rest of the pirates from the Worst Generation. They're also called supernovas. Now we then see him again after the time skip when he meets with Kid and Hawkins to discuss a potential alliance to take down Shanks. We all know how that turned out. Apoo was already sided with Kaido, and so that likely led to Kaido meeting Hawkins and Kid after he jumped off of a sky island and so coincidentally ran into the three of them. Now Kid was defeated because he refused to serve Kaido, and Hawkins in turn decided to serve Kaido because that was the only way that he could survive. And then comes the most recent the last 2 or 3 chapters where Apoo hurts Luffy and Zoro. Now I want to go a little bit more into how Apoo's Devil Fruit works. So we know Apoo is able to convert his body parts into different musical instruments, play them, and then the released music is somehow able to damage opponents that he so chooses. Now when he attacked Kizaru at Sabaody Archipelago, we see him morph his left arm into a saxophone before ultimately creating an explosion within Kizaru's body after slashing both one of his arms and his leg. Now it seems that with him being from the Long Arm tribe, his long arms actually complement his Devil Fruit pretty well, given that he has more surface area to morph his limbs into different instruments. I would expect that his long arms are what enables him to actually convert them into a full saxophone or another long musical instrument. Now his music, we know, can create different attacks. We've seen it create an explosion against Kizaru, a slash against Zoro, or some type of direct impact, which was shown against Luffy. Apoo is also able to direct his attacks at specific opponents, meaning that his music doesn't actually affect everyone around him, but only the enemy that he targets. So we see back at Sabaody Archipelago, when Apoo was fighting against Kizaru, both X-Drake and Hawkins were also listening to his music, but they weren't actually harmed by his music, meaning that likely Apoo only targeted Kizaru as the enemy of his attack. Now, his ability is also extremely weird. One of my questions is, how is music able to damage someone listening to it? Now we all know Devil Fruits are mysterious in general, but even the most weird fruits are explainable. For example, let's look at Kuma's Paw Paw fruit. He's able to repel anything, right? Which allows him to create a bomb by repelling the air around him. Now this is ridiculous, but absolutely explainable. So how does Apoo's fruit exactly work? Now his fruit could be based off of either sound in general or music. I personally believe that his fruit is based off of music only, because he can morph his body into musical instruments. If he had a fruit based off of sound in general, it cannot explain how he's able to morph his body into instruments, because I think sound and music are still 2 separate concepts. For a sound fruit's ability to allow someone to morph into musical instruments seems a bit off. I would expect a sound fruit to allow someone to control sound in general, so therefore I think the fruit is called the music fruit instead. Now it remains inconclusive whether his music can damage someone because it's simply the inherent nature of the fruit's powers, like he's able to produce uniquely quote-unquote physically destructive sound waves, or because there's some other middle factor with an actual logical reason. Now his fruit's ability also reminds me of Baby 5, who can morph her body into weapons with her weapon fruit. I think the two fruits are pretty similar. Now following this thought, the fruit that Apoo has might be an instrument fruit. If this is the case, it leads to another question. Can Apoo create attacks from music produced by instruments that are not morphed from his body? Then again, I don't really see a point for this because what are the chances that music will just be conveniently playing in the background during one of his fights? There's also no point of him actually carrying around a musical instrument because he can just morph into one. Now another big question is, can his ability work well with Haki? The answer, I think, is probably yes, because if his ability does not work with Haki, I think Apoo would never be able to defeat a Logia fruit user, just like how he was useless against Kizaru. Now I don't like to think this because that would mean Apoo has some sort of unsurpassable limit that he can never get over, meaning that no matter how strong he gets, he will never be able to defeat a Logia fruit user. And I don't like to think this is the case. I like to think that in One Piece, no matter what devil fruit powers you have, the limitation of how strong you can be is not what the devil fruit powers are, but how you use those powers, and how creative you are in forming strong abilities that you can use in battle. So I'd like to think that Apoo's devil fruit will not limit him in how strong he can become. But we still don't know if Haki can be applied to something like sound waves. We've only seen it applied to body parts and weapons, like a sword or bullets. So we're not sure if Haki can be applied to sound. Now another possibility is that Apoo can imbue his musical instruments with Haki, so that the sounds produced from them have Haki and can actually affect Logia users. As of now, we only know Busou Haki can be applied to physical objects only, so this idea or topic remains debatable. Now let's talk about Apoo's actual power level. Now I firmly believe Apoo is not commander level yet. My estimate is that Apoo is as strong as Hawkins. I think Kid is slightly stronger than both of them, but this is, again, totally debatable. But I don't think any of them are as strong as Luffy or Zoro. Now I admit part of the reason I'm saying this is because I want both Luffy and Zoro to really live up to the hype post-timeskip. But also considering Luffy defeated 2 of Big Mom's commanders and just upgraded his Haki, I'd be so disappointed if Apoo was stronger than him. Now Zoro is a bit harder to say since he has never shown us his limits after the timeskip, but considering how One Piece has always been, Zoro has always been just a bit behind Luffy. I don't think this has changed or will ever change because it's kind of a fixed theme in this series, and Zoro has to become Luffy's right-hand man. But anyways, yeah, I don't think they would lose to any of these supernovas. Not to take anything away from these other supernovas, they're super strong characters, they're just not stronger than Luffy or Zoro. Meaning that I think in a 1v1, solely a 1v1, Luffy or Zoro will win. But of course, this isn't super easy to say, which is part of why these discussions are always so interesting. Now let's compare Apoo to the Tobiropo. Now the Tobiropo are still super mysterious. I mean, we were just introduced to them 2 chapters ago. But we know people like X-Drake is a member, and he's also a supernova. Well, he's actually a spy that's secretly working for the Navy, but no matter. We don't know how much stronger he became after the timeskip, so it's hard to assess his power level, and therefore the rest of the group. But I do think that even among them, their power levels are somewhat different. And I'm going based off of their attitudes. So we see Sasaki in chapter 979, he says that he considers the rest of the Tobiropo as scrubs. And so based off of his arrogance or confidence in himself, I would say that he's probably stronger than the rest of the Tobiropo. So likely there is some power spectrum even within this group. These members are also qualified candidates to fight against any one of the calamities and take their place. So it is safe to say that they are close, quote-unquote close, below the calamity level. I say quote-unquote because we don't know exactly how close these Tobiropo members are to the Calamities. Now, in addition to this, we know Kaido's pirate crew has a power-based ranking system, whereby anyone can challenge anyone else for their higher ranking positions. So like how the Tobiropo can challenge the Calamities, Apoo can challenge the Tobiropo for a spot. So either Apoo has challenged one of the Tobiropo already and lost, meaning he's weaker than them, or he hasn't had a chance to challenge them yet. My opinion is I'd safely say Apoo is only slightly weaker than the Tobiropo in general. Because if he was as strong or stronger than the Tobiropo, he would have probably assumed one of the positions in that group already. Because he likely would have competed with one of them for a spot and won. Now, of course, it could just be Apoo didn't have enough time to challenge a Tobiropo, given that he's a new recruit, as I mentioned earlier. So, of course, this is debatable. But I'm kind of betting on the fact that Apoo has been in Kaido's army long enough to challenge the Tobiropo. I don't think there's kind of like a time requirement for being a part of Kaido's army to challenge anyone in the army. I think anyone who comes into the army can probably challenge anybody else in the army. So likely Apoo challenged a Tobiropo and just didn't become one, so he's probably slightly weaker. Or of course he could just be uninterested in being a higher ranking officer in Kaido's army, so he just didn't end up challenging anyone. Now, another question that I want to go into is, what will happen to Apoo by the end of the Wano arc? Now, of course, the truth is no one knows. The war at Onigashima just started, and there has to be more plot development before we can say anything about this question. But what I would like to see in the end is Apoo switching sides and end up fighting against Kaido. Because I feel like we've had so many foreshadows where pirates of the worst generation end up in controversial situations, kind of siding with the bad guys, but end up turning out to be good guys, quote-unquote good guys, anyways. Like, for example, X-Drake. We know X-Drake is a member of the Tobiropo, he's working with Kaido, but he's actually secretly a spy for the Marines, so in the end he's a good guy. Now Hawkins is another example. Hawkins is a bit tricky because we don't exactly know what his true intentions are, but I think his genuine feelings are not to work with Kaido. We know he was forced to work with Kaido in the end because it was his only way to survive. I mean, he and Kid, there was no way they could defeat Kaido, and so the only way to survive was to work under him, which is what Hawkins chose to do. Now, he had a brief chat with Law about alliances after he was defeated by Law, and seems to show some relief that Law and Luffy's alliance is doing well, despite the fact that his alliance with Kid has completely backfired. And so this leads me to think that, his genuine feelings are, in support of, his fellow pirates of the worst generation. Now, Beige, Law, and Kid are other examples as well. They all decided to side with Luffy, which makes me consider them, quote-unquote the good guys. And of course I say quote-unquote because it's not easy to define, first of all, what a good guy is, and second of all, we know these pirates, they all have questionable activities, and for example, Kid still resorts to violence and likes to kill people. Beige has his own sort of controversial background. So, but the bottom line, I consider them good guys because they're siding with Luffy and they're fighting against what are ultimately the bad guys, like Kaido. So I do think in the end, Oda's creating this theme that pirates of the worst generation are ultimately the good guys in the end. So this leads me to think Apoo likely being a pirate of the worst generation, he's likely going to end up being quote-unquote a good guy and siding with Luffy in defeating Kaido. At least this is what I want to believe. That's all for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.